be.
Good. Well, you won't get all the chaos before this point.
Just to warn you, though, I was testing the GoTo earlier today, and somehow the sound wasn't recording for me, so no guarantees here. You can also press the start recording on your side too, just to have a copy. Do you see it?
Show control panel. Show my change. Share my webcam.
No. Here. Okay, now did it change your panel a little bit?
Okay, get that down. You can see.
Give it a try?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, can everybody hear me? I assume you can. Let's get started. And my name is Brian Caldwell, and I want to welcome everybody here today. Should be a great NYCO meeting in a tradition of great NYCO meetings. And soil fertility has been a mystery to me for a long time. And I think we've got 3 speakers today who are going to really look at it from different angles and give us some good insights. So I hope that what we can do is in the morning, each of the speakers can talk for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have our potluck lunch here, and then we'll make this all into a circle, which it kind of already is, and just get into a lot of back and forth and questions and answers that I hope will come up during the talk. So that should be a great. It's our usual format, and it works really well, and this should be a good topic for it. So our 3 speakers. I don't know why this is getting a little feedback here. Our 3 speakers, Derek Christianson is a vegetable grower in eastern Massachusetts. We've got Jack Lazor, who's going to join us via webcast, which is part of what this technical stuff is all about. And Jack is a little under the weather, so the travel was going to be a little much, but he's graciously going to join us from a computer in Vermont. And Jack is a dairy farmer that many of you probably already know, Butterworks Farm. He's been doing it for a long time and has given particular interest into soil fertility, crop production, crop nutrition. And finally, Klaus Martens. Everybody knows him from Penn Yan. And Klaus is a grain farmer, has about, I think, about 1,300 acres in production, and again has really been thinking about these issues for many years and has made a particular study of William Albrecht's work. So I'm hoping that we're beyond the stage. I think back to when I was starting with Cooperative Extension a long time ago, and an expert from Cornell said, nitrogen is nitrogen is nitrogen. And I think we're going to go a few steps beyond that today. So Derek, why don't you start us out? Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian. I have a mic right here, so people can hear me all right. I have a tendency to like to wander. So just really introduce myself. My name is Derek Christianson. I drove here last night from eastern Massachusetts. You see a picture on the map in just a second. I'm a commercial vegetable grower. I've been growing vegetables for about 1,000 years, doing presentations. I do a lot of work, soil consulting, focusing on fertility management. Primarily with organic growers, we work a few conventional growers, and I do focus mostly in southeastern Massachusetts, so excuse my naivete when we answer questions that are maybe a little bit specific to soils in this area. But the conversation that I'm going to lead us into today is going to just hopefully be making a push and a plug to think about your operations and what are those leverage points that we have in each individual farm, especially those that are fertility-based, to make sure our bottom line is in a good place. So I've labeled the talk building profits through full spectrum fertility, and what it really is about for me is taking advantage of the bounty of nature. When we think of photosynthesis and think of the sunshine that's blessing our vegetable fields or our grain fields or pastures on a daily basis, what I'm really interested in is making sure that our sponge, which is our farm, is doing the best job possible of collecting that energy from the sky. So as we work through today, what I'm going to talk about is a couple of leverage points that I think are maybe a little bit less talked about calcium and phosphorus and some of the typical things. So this is the gratuitous photo, which is what are we involved in? Really what we're involved in on our farm is focusing on human health. And we get people who ask us, how we're doing and is the farm successful? And my stock answer to success is, well, we don't know yet. One of the ways that we're going to judge success is looking at the health quality of our CSA members. So we have a 90-member summertime CSA that serves about 120 families in a roadside stand. And in all honesty, one of the things that I'm looking for is what would the cavity rate of our kids be 5, 10 years into the future? We have kids in our CSA that are actually mineralizing teeth in a way that doesn't have to have healthcare costs associated with sort of rescue chemistry. And so these are our 2 daughters. We have 2 young girls. Our oldest is going to be 3 in May, and our youngest was just born last August. And I'm just going to put it out there. We've taken a really aggressive approach to fertility. It's not something we necessarily advocate for everybody. But when we walked onto our land in 2008, it was being farmed conventionally as a small silage patch. It was only about 4 acres of tillable piece that was used and abused. It wasn't treated very well. It was often, the old timers tell me that they would either have to wait till the good solid freeze in the winter to cut, or the tractor would be up to its hubs when it was harvested in the fall. And so that land was really kind of done once over. And if we had the option of taking the best piece of land possible, we definitely would go that direction. For us, we were moving to southeastern Massachusetts, where we don't really have a lot of great land opportunities for young farmers. So when the opportunity came around, we had an opportunity to take on a piece that really wasn't a great piece of land. And for me, some of the work that I kind of influences me is within the biodynamic realm. But I wasn't really willing to wait 5, 10, and 15 years to have the soil fertility start to nourish our families. So a lot of what we're talking about is kind of putting the accelerator down a bit. The benefits of these fertility investments, of course, it's focusing on human nutrition is one thing. Focusing on crop health is another, and that's ultimately the bottom line that we normally talk about with commercial growers. Is what we're looking at is what can we do through investments in fertility to make sure that all the labor costs that we have in our operation, all those fixed costs that we have in our operation, we're getting the biggest return from those investments. And so a lot of times we're walking and having the experience of seeing some commercial growers that aren't really meeting the maximum production. Thank you. Aren't really meeting that maximum production that they could be. So we're sort of stressing and saying, if you're a tomato grower, what's the average yield of your tomato plants? What's the yield that's coming out of that square footage? And what can we do to increase that yield? What can we do to take away the stress of alternaria or early blight if that's a nutritional issue? Let's focus on these leverage points and make sure that the work that we're doing on the farm is going to allow us to have a farm in the future. So. Just briefly, my biography, I've been farming for about 12 years, as I mentioned, mostly all small-scale commercial vegetables. We are in a part of the world, this is dramatically different than this area. So we're down in southeastern Massachusetts, about an hour south of Boston, between the Cape and Providence. It is Bristol County, where I live, has about 600,000 people, and it probably has something like a dozen dairy farms and very little grain production. The land base, the biggest agricultural resource in our area is cranberry production. That's mostly getting marketed and sold. Vegetable-wise, Dartmouth, the town that I farm in, has got a strong history of agriculture. There's still a lot of commercial vegetable growers in that area. Most of those growers who are growing high-value crops service the markets in the Cape, Boston and Providence, restaurants and things of that nature. When we started our farm, one of the things that I was aware of is I didn't really enjoy sitting in the truck. We did enough of that just even doing 1 day a week deliveries in New York City at Hoffman Valley. And so we sort of decided we're going to be stubborn because we're young and we can do that, and we're going to hyper-localize our markets. So we market everything within 5 miles of the farm. And because we're only producing 4 or 5 acres of vegetables, we actually have the market base to do that. Our town of Dartmouth has about 30,000 people in it, a good summer population. New Bedford nearby is much less well-off economic community, but there's 90,000 people in New Bedford. So if you imagine that population base being served by very few farms. we like to think about how we can judge our production. The inputs are one thing. What are the economic costs involved? What are the labor inputs? And then looking at the outcomes. When we talk about outcomes, we're not talking about just yield in terms of bushels or poundage. We're talking about the quality parameters. How long does something stay, if we're selling fresh vegetables, how long does that bunch of kale stay in somebody's fridge in good shape? And then the intangibles, those positive and negative externalities, that might be the benefits. Like for us, what that really is we do a pick your own operation for our CSA. It's having the kids that come out that get addicted to eating fresh vegetables because they actually taste good. That doesn't necessarily follow on the bottom line, but what we're doing is creating customers that are interested in actually supporting local agriculture through their life going forward. And then ultimately, what is the impact on the future resource base? Are we doing something that's actually building the capacity going forward to sort of take that solar energy on a daily basis? Or are we, plowing and losing topsoil through wind erosion and things of that nature? It's nothing too controversial with these ideas. Just to give you a little bit better idea of our scale of production, I farm full-time. I have one other full-time employee who I generally try to hire people for 2-year stints at a minimum, and they start in March. They just started last week and have guaranteed employment through November, and then if they want to stay on for a second year, we're keeping them busy through the winter, and that reduces our training costs in the year too. And then we're also bringing some summer staff. So basically, in height of August, it's 3 full-time employees. This time of year, it's 2. We could probably get by with 1 for a good part of the year, but one of the things that we're trying to do, one of our outcomes is training and educating. So we have kind of a history of working with people that want to become farm managers. The scale of our production is small enough that almost all the work we're doing is by hand transplanting, a lot of hand cultivation. It allows us to do tight, dense plantings, and returning that work. So this is to shop last year's crops. Turnips, lettuce, cabbage, early season. This was in June of last year. How many folks in the room are vegetable growers? Just to get an idea. I know there's mostly a lot of grain growers and stuff in that area. So has anybody here grow potatoes and have experience maybe spraying some type of BT or something to control the Colorado potato beetle or do anything along those lines? That's a nice thing to be in. Some folks have. One of the things I really like to stress is when we think about the labor involved in our operations, is that labor something that's kind of fighting a fire or is it building a fire? And so when we think about fertility investments, we're thinking about building up that energy within that soil. So in our potato crops, if we can focus on nutrition and create a crop that actually doesn't really kind of, put out a little radar that says Colorado potato beetles come eat us, then we can avoid that fighting the fire with a spray at the end of the day. And so every time we're looking at, what are the labor inputs going into our operation, we're always trying to look, is this labor something that is actually benefiting us in a long-term approach, or is it just something that we're doing to make sure that we're putting out those fires? Once you start to think of it in that reference point, then starting to spend money on minerals is maybe not such a difficult thing. We're going to talk today about addressing mineral deficiencies. It's really important to stress, because we're hyper-focused a little bit on boron and sulfur and zinc in just a moment, that if you don't have water, there's a lot of things that minerals aren't going to do for you. Growing healthy crops without adequate water is a difficult thing. So as we get focused on some of the mineral nutrition things, let's not forget the basics. Just a couple of crop shots. Our tagline on the farm, it changes depending on who we're talking to, but where we're at right now is I think of it as caring, honoring, and dignifying our biological systems. There's complexity to our biological systems that I can't even begin to understand the fullness and the detail. And a lot of times what we're doing when we're addressing mineral deficiencies is just allowing that complexity to express itself, to harness the fullness of nature. I don't know where New York State is, but in Massachusetts there's a lot of effort to do farm viability enhancement programs looking at energy, solar arrays, methane digesters and stuff along those lines. And as we talk about technologies, I like to stress that we still are, as growers, we already have the largest solar array on our fields on a day-to-day basis. And so this is a shot of winter squash from a few years ago. And really what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to make sure that that solar array is functioning to the best of its capacity. How to tell if you have a mineral deficiency. You can tell sometimes with crop signals with inferior production graphs. Soil testing, we do a lot of a conversation point about soil testing is really it's a tool that's going to help you make smarter decisions. So if you're looking at it right now, we're doing a lot of work with private labs to give us a little bit fuller picture of a soil test using a Mehlich 3 analysis out of Logan. Gives us information on soil minerals like molybdenum and selenium, trace minerals of that nature. And ultimately what it is we're trying to suss out, is there something missing from the picture? Does anybody have weeds in the farm? The vegetable growers in the room certainly do. We all do. If your limiting factors are weed management, then starting to focus on fertility investments, there's some growers out there that will tell you that's going to make a lot of sense. But if you still have weed pressure on your farm and you haven't figured out a management system to deal with, competition from those weeds, focusing on a boron application is going to be a little bit less of a priority. So we're sort of talking about getting towards that icing on the cake. This is a shot. And we can kind of argue about maybe the dangers of having such a bare soil type of cultivation system, but this is a shot from a couple of years ago. Spring cabbage in June, followed up with some alliums in the background there. And ultimately, where I'm at, harnessing that nature is we do a lot of monocropping on our farm. For better or worse, 1,000-foot square foot bed of tomatoes, basically tomatoes with maybe some clover put underneath it. But it tends to be a sort of unnatural system. So we're going to try to work within that unnatural system of annual vegetable crop production and make sure that we have the diversity of biology, make sure that we have the diversity of mineral nutrition that's necessary for those crops to be healthy and happy. Is there anybody in the room that's focused on sulfur applications in their operation in the past year or two? By a show of hands. And by a show of hands, is there anybody that says, sulfur, we need to? They looked at a soil test. Do you have a sense of soil tests in this area? They tend to show, adequate levels of sulfur.
Actually, I don't know about other labs, but as far as I know, Dairy 1, which took over from Cornell, doesn't test for sulfur. Am I right about that? Okay, so we don't know.
So we don't know. So this is the aspect of soil testing. So UMass does do a sulfur test. A lot of times when we're talking about using private labs, it's because we want to have information that some of the state labs won't provide us with. And in the world of organic farming, I'm a young farmer, but we have a lot of folks that are kind of this traditionalist cover crop compost applications. Let's not bring anything in off the farm besides lime or a few other amendments of that nature. And what I like to stress to those individuals that are in that kind of, closed system approach to agriculture is you have to have an awareness that before the Clean Air Act was passed in the 70s, we received a lot higher amounts of sulfur deposition from acid rain. We have to think about the fact that our farms are not inside a bubble where we are only just managing what we're managing. And so over the course of the last 10 to 20 years, there's been an increasing awareness that sulfur deficiencies can actually be present on farms in the Northeast. Whereas if you went back into the 60s and 70s, probably rarely would see that. Now, of course, a fertilizer company can come up with data points and everything to sell you whatever they want to sell you, right? That's what their marketing is charged with doing. But this is a graph that's prepared by the Mosaic Corporation. They're one of the largest fertilizer manufacturers. And they market Sulfomag or K-Mag, and they mine that down in New Mexico. And if you look in the top for 1986, it's looking at sulfate deposition from sulfur from rain. And then you go down, and that's 2008. And it's hard to read on this is annual, but what we've seen is basically a 70 to 80% reduction in sulfur that we're receiving from rainfall on an annual basis. So at some point, something that might not have been a limiting factor for folks in the past might become a limiting factor in the future. Sulfur is an anion. It's a negatively charged nutrient that will leach from soils quite readily. And most people will have an understanding of cation exchange capacity, CEC. You sometimes see it on a soil test, talking about your soil's capacity, the clay and the organic matter to hold on to those positive cations. Very few soils in the Northeast have a very measurable anion exchange capacity. It's because our clays don't necessarily hold on to those negative sites. It's basically our organic matter. So one of the things that we're going to do when we talk about sulfur management is what can we be doing to increase our organic matter. A lot of times the recently living through cover crops, or the root exudates, things that as roots die back, some of that recent organic matter. We're going to focus on that as building our bank account of sulfur over time. But it's very often that especially if you see this with hay fields and pasture fields that aren't getting a lot of fertility added to them on an annual basis, you see those sulfur tests, they're oftentimes below on a malic analysis, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5, 10, 15 parts per million. And we'd like to target 25 to 30 parts per million. So we got to start deciding what are we going to do about it. Before we talk about that, just briefly, what do we care about sulfur? Among other things, sulfur is a structural component of a lot of proteins. Proteins are going to help build plant defense systems against insects, but also especially against diseases. And when I was first starting to kind of get into focusing on the nutritional and the quality aspects of food, one of the gentlemen that I went and did a course with down in Pennsylvania, Neil Kinsey, who speaks a lot on the acre circuit, he stressed that sulfur was the key to flavor in crops. This past winter, my wife and I were watching a PBS program talking about the science of taste. And the taste experience that we have when we eat is a lot of times the volatilization of that food coming through our nasal passageway. And it would make all the sense in the world that sulfur, which can be as key to oil production, a lot of canola growers, for example, are folks that emphasize sulfur fertility, that sulfur would play a key in developing those flavor profiles. So for us on our farm, where our calling card is, a person having that experience biting into one of our carrots or our beets and saying, well, is this a quality product or not? We've decided sulfur is absolutely one of the things that we want to stress. If you're working with livestock and you want to have palatable forages, it's an important thing to consider. What's it really look like to address sulfur deficiencies? This is kind of putting that, practical sense. What's the cost involved? And we work on a commercial vegetable scale that allows us to spend quite readily on fertility. So just to look at those, a lot of times you're going to look at a sulfate form of a sulfur fertilizer. It's relatively available. It's useful in the springtime before the biology is really warmed up. So a lot of times it will depend on what your needs are. If you have some calcium deficiencies, calcium sulfate in the form of gypsum is an easy way to apply fertilizer, sulfur, to your fields. Right now, if you're buying in just small pallet quantities, it'll cost you about $12 a bag. That's for me in southeastern Massachusetts, probably even cheaper for you guys in this neck of the woods. And it's going to cost you a little over $1.40 per pound of actual sulfur. Even a 100-pound application of gypsum mixed into a blended fertilizer is going to be an additional sulfur that's going to put about 16, 17 pounds of sulfur on your soils. That can be the difference between growing a crop that's going to have that flavor profile that we want to have. If you're short on potassium sulfate is one of the common potassium fertilizers for organic growers. It's expensive. We don't put on tons of it because a lot of it can leach. It's a dangerous fertilizer in that sense to make long-term investments in. But if you're growing a potassium-hungry crop, for us, in our neck of the woods, it's potatoes and tomatoes and beets. If you want to have nice big-sized beets, potassium is one of the key nutrients to focus in on. Well, if you have a potassium deficiency based on the soil test and you want to be fertilizing for potassium, you can use potassium sulfate and you're going to get sulfur for it as well. The downside of these sulfate form of nutrients is they can leach. They're in a mobile form. And so if we're talking about addressing long-term sulfur deficiencies with that idea, the concept that we're not getting the atmospheric deposition that we used to get, we're going to focus on very small amounts of elemental sulfur applications, oftentimes put into a blend, 10 to 15 pounds to the acre. And the difference between the elemental sulfur and the sulfate forms is it's going to require soil biology to actually make it available. And that's actually going to be seen as an advantage because what it's going to be able to do is it's going to slow that release of sulfur over time. And to be honest, it depends on what kind of summer we get. If we put on pastille sulfur, there's a chance that the sulfur we're putting on this year might not be released in full accord until the next 2 or 3 growing seasons. Cost-wise, elemental sulfur might run, if you're using organic, it might run you about $25 for a 50-pound bag. If you're putting down a 10 to 15-pound application to the acre blended in, you're talking about $5 to $10 investment. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Should we be concerned at all about toxicity and if it's possible to have excess, and there are certain crops that are more sensitive to that?
In general, I don't get too concerned about sulfur toxicity to a crop. We do get concerned about what it does to the biology. And there's sort of depends on where you are on that spectrum. Some people will say if you're using an elemental sulfur, you don't want to go higher than 100 pounds. Some people will put that limit at 50 pounds. We're suggesting even a lower level of 10 to 15 pounds. It depends on what type of soil you have. If you're growing in organic soils that have a good biological base, they can buffer some of that stress that will happen. Sulfuric acid's not exactly a friend to bacteria and all those good guys in the soils. But generally, gypsum applications, it all depends a lot on where you're at. Out west, they put routinely they put on 1,000, 2,000 pounds of gypsum to help open up soils. Potato growers, and I know organic potato growers, where they're putting on heavy levels of potassium, they're putting gypsum on to help balance the solution of nutrients that are available for the potatoes. And they're often start with 1,000 pound per acre application rate because that's what spreader trucks can spread kind of gypsum in accurate place. We can talk more this afternoon in kind of specific situations. But just to put it on that spectrum, so if you're a really small market grower, this might be as little as buying a bag of elemental sulfur and just hand spreading that over your acreage. Anybody who's working in our range, anywhere from 3 to 10, 15 acres, we often recommend going and working with your fertilizer dealer and getting bulk blends so you don't have to become the chemist in the garage trying to balance everything out. And let them do all that hard balancing for you.
And a good source of gypsum here is $93 and $90 a ton.
Yep.
So it's a really cheap material, except that ourselves do buy calcium. And you have to be careful with that.
Yeah. So gypsum might not be as practical unless you have a soil crop that really has a high demand for that. Yeah. The dollar figures for these things is we have to go back to that map where we are in southeastern Massachusetts. We're sort of beholden. We don't have, the only fertilizer sellers in our neck of the woods are focusing on cranberry production and conventional stuff. So, we're getting mined products that we have to have it bagged and shipped over vast distances. And certainly if you're a small-scale operation, it gets a lot more expensive. The bigger your operation, you have all that economy of scale, it becomes a lot easier to, get fertility inputs for less money. All right, what's the definition between a major and a minor nutrient or a trace mineral? A lot of it's the quantity that's needed for adequate crop health. It's not necessarily a determination of how important those minerals are. I want to stress that before we talk about boron. Is we're not saying that boron is not important because it's a trace mineral. We're saying it's a trace mineral because it's needed in much smaller quantity than the major nutrients like calcium. For the folks that work with fruit crops, one of the things that boron will do for you is help with fruit flower set pollination. We probably pushed that a little bit to the extreme. This was a shot of a cherry tomato in August of 2011 on our farm. This variety is Gold Nugget. It's a Johnny's variety. And not that truss, but another one we counted at that time, and it had about 95 to 100 blossoms. And that was just one truss on, about this height on that cherry tomato plant. The bottom fruit that were ripening at the time in early August were generally between 40 and 45 cherry tomatoes. The tomatoes split on the 2 and 3 branch trusses. So this is that idea, especially with the fruiting crops that have that interest of kind of reproducing themselves. It's harnessing that fertility, but if we're going to do it, we've got to make sure that everything that's necessary to reproduce is there on the scene. So let's talk about boron for a moment. Is there anybody in the room that's put a boron fertilizer or a boron application on their farm in the last year? We do a lot of these courses in Massachusetts, and that number has been reaching up higher and higher every year. So hopefully this brief segment will get you to at least assess, do we need boron in our system? So boron is mined, generally speaking, in desert locations. 20 mule team borax is talking about the 20 mule teams that were used to carry it out of the deserts of California. Most of the production that you see in the United States, that's where it's coming from, Turkey and South America, other places. And our target level, this is an aspect of a trace mineral. The target level on a test that we use in Logan Labs is 1 to 3 parts per million. Which means in an acre, it's about 2 to 6 pounds of actual boron we're looking for on a soil test. Much dramatically different number than what you would look for with calcium. Michael SARE, who does soil consulting through the Central America region, has kind of come up with his assessment is that we're looking at calcium levels and we're looking at boron levels in relationship to calcium, and he wants to target 1/1000th of your calcium. So the higher your calcium goes up, the higher that you want to start to build your boron up. And that's partially because calcium will compete and impact boron availability of the crop during the growing season.
Question.
Yeah.
Heart level. How do you pronounce that? Medic?
Yeah, Malik 3, yeah.
Is that the method to test the soil?
So that's a soil testing method that Logan uses. I know the Dairy One Lab is really, it's not their standard test, but they will offer that. But boron is often, you got to talk to the lab. A lot of the labs are using just a water analysis for boron. So you can get a sense of, by having a conversation with your lab, what is their target level that they're looking for. Each lab's going to use different analysis measures. The reason we use Logan Labs, which is out in Ohio, is a couple things. Number one is they do trace mineral testing, so if we want to look at cobalt and molybdenum levels, we're talking about receiving the best bang for our buck, and we're working with leguminous cover crops, and we want to make sure that we have molybdenum on the seed. So they have that information and willing to test that for it. The other is that soil testing allows us to have conversation pieces, and because we were focusing on quality, we don't have necessarily a huge dense cohort of people in Massachusetts that we can have that conversation with. We need to widen our scope out a little bit. So we're having a conversation with people in other parts of the country. And the Logan Labs has been one of the labs that people decided to start working with. They follow kind of an Albrecht style in terms of looking at using that Malik test. It's a stronger acid than what the Morgan test is that a lot of the northeastern states use. So among other things, what boron will do is it helps to create sap pressure, which allows for nutrients to be transferred and transported throughout the crop. And we had an experience where we were pushing our boron levels. We kind of wanted to see what is too much. And last spring, we figured out what is too much. And the way that played out is we were bunching red Russian kale. We grow red Russian kale for kind of a salad crop in early May. We were cutting our first Russian kale of the season last year, getting an idea of our climate on May 4th. And we were just doing small bunches for the weekend for the farm stand. It was probably a dozen bunches. So in the 2 to 3 minutes it took us to cut our 10 or 12 bunches of red Russian kale, if we went back to that very first crop that we cut, we could see the sap starting to drip down the side of the stem just in those 2 to 3 minutes. That sap pressure was certainly not lacking in pushing those nutrients throughout that crop. If you're going to address a boron deficiency, boron is highly leachable. It's very mobile in soil. It has an affinity for nitrogen. It's going to leach out quite readily. So if we're going to put boron onto our soils, we absolutely want to think about what we can do to stabilize it. For the most part, that's looking at adding a fixed carbon. And that's that spectrum. So if you're the backyard gardener or somebody like that, would say, well, go stick some compost in the bucket for a day, let it kind of get murky and brown, and then use that brown water for your liquid that you're going to add your mule-2 borax to. Commercial growers, we're going to often suggest fulvic acid or some sort of liquid humate or something to stabilize that molecule so that when we put it on, it's going to stay there for the growing season or for part of the growing season rather than being leached away in the spring rains. Let's see. Solid core is one of the easiest ones to work with on a commercial scale because it allows you to put it into foliar sprays quite easily. It's about 20% actual boron. So I've thrown up some different soil tests. Imagine your soil test came back and it was 0.3 parts per million of boron. You wanted to have 1 as your target. Your deficit would be 0.7 parts per million. You'd have about a pound deficit of boron. To get that 1.4 pounds of boron, you need to apply 7 pounds of solid boric to the acre. And how are you going to do this? You have 3 options. Well, there's more than 3, but 3 of the easiest options. If you're working with a blended fertilizer, see if they blend a granular boron right into their blend. They do that work for you. You put it in your spreader, and you're not doing any extra labor. The only cost that you have is the added cost of the boron to the fertilizer. If sometimes, like for us, we work with a lot of non-custom blends on smaller acreages, and you need to put it on, you put it on as a liquid. In the springtime, oftentimes it's easiest to kind of get it done with for the year. Even though the leach is better to put it on more than once for the growing season, we just say, let's start with a single application. And 7 pounds might create the need that you have in this scenario. If you want to be safe, you can start with a 3-pound application of solid boric. Put it into your tank. For our scale, to give us an idea of how small we are, we can put it into a backpack sprayer. It takes us 4 backpacks to cover an acre. It takes us a little over an hour of time to spray that out. And the cost of the materials is going to be less than $10, not including the labor. The labor costs are going to be more expensive a lot of times when we focus on fertility than some of these trace mineral materials. Can we afford, yeah, question?
Before we leave boron, I thought maybe you had said something like, how do you know if you put on too much? And can't you get into some phytotoxicity with boron if you do put on too much?
Yeah, and that's, so amongst other things, what it does is create sap pressure. And so when plants are really small and don't have that need, especially the dicots like beans and legumes, you can certainly start to burn leaves. What happens is basically nutrients are pushed to the extension of those leaves in kind of almost like a rush at a soccer stadium. And
You can actually kill the corn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the springtime, exactly, that temperature aspect, it can be a really big issue. And so, one, we look at that relationship of calcium to make sure, we're not over applying our boron in a low calcium situation where it can give us more problems. And then that's where we, dial it back 2 to 3 pounds to the acre, not as a foliar spray, but as a ground spray, sprayed out a couple weeks before you actually plant your crop, so that you're not putting it on as a foliar application during that scale. And that would be the way you can be a little bit safe around that. So. We can talk more in the afternoon about, boron was used to clean the gravel driveways as a, keep weeds from growing. So you can absolutely kill things with it. In our experience, it's all a question of, what the situation's like. I was speaking to somebody that's consultants, work with growers up in Maine, and, I don't know why they're doing this, but the potato growers up there, there's somebody there that wanted to show that, if you had adequate calcium levels and good biology in your soil, how much you can buffer with that scenario. And they were putting on 10 pounds of actual boron in certain fields, partially just to kind of show that, in certain situations, we would absolutely not recommend that. You oftentimes end up doing a lot more hurt than it would be good. But it's going to be a case-by-case basis. And it's another scenario, if you're not used to using a product and you're going to start to utilize it on your farm, if you're wary of something starting at a really small scale, just start a small piece, run a side-by-side trial and see. You know, it's a nice way to assess whether or not it made a difference. All right, so can we not afford to focus on fertility? This is that energy return on energy invested. For me, it's if I'm going to put the time and energy putting a tomato plant in the ground, that I took care of in the greenhouse for 5 or 6 weeks, and we're going to stake and trellis it, and we're going to have all the marketing costs associated with washing and boxing. We absolutely want to make sure we're getting a full return on those labor steps that we're investing in. But also, long term, it's looking at how can we afford the healthcare costs looking forward. I was watching PBS the other night, and they said that right now 1/6 of our spending in the economy is focused on healthcare. And if you look at the long-term costs of diabetes care, some of the things with heart care, there's going to be no way, shape, or form that I have any sense as a young person that 30 or 40 years from now we're going to be able to afford anything in our economy besides taking care of sick people. And so this to me is, from a strategic investment, one of the best places we can make our investment. I kind of am tongue-in-cheek working with some of our folks in our neck of the woods that work in the healthcare industry. And you know, what I'd like to see is let's make bigger investments in soil fertility. We started doing it on our farm, and one of the ways that we did it is like, this gets expensive to start spending money on fertility, but we have customers that buy multivitamins and things of that nature. So we have the advantage of having a relationship with our CSA customers. And 2 years ago when we started our winter CSA, I wrote them a letter and I said, look, we built a little high tunnel from the NRCS, gave us money in a little 3,000 square foot high tunnel. We're going to grow winter greens for you out of that high tunnel this winter. I can guarantee you a better quality product if we had a little more money in cash to fertilize and bring in some compost and kind of treat that soil with luxury fertility. And so we started what we call our deep nutrition share on the farm, which is basically a line item when people send in their CSA checks that if they would like to submit extra money that would be directed towards our capital fertility program, anything that gets sent in, that will go towards our fertility investments. And for me, it was a realization, and it depends on your client, it depends on your markets, but where we are, we have a lot of people that have second homes and have, you know, pretty nice cars. And to think about, you know, nailing $5 out of them on a weekly basis to make sure their health is better, it's a small investment that they're going to make. And making that ask is one of the best steps I know that we can make to actually start to have that money in. So we've done that the last 2 years. Last year, to give you a sense, our scale of our operation, we're small. We're grossing about a little over $100,000 in direct marketing vegetables. Last year, we brought in an additional $2,000 in the summertime and an additional $800 in the winter, so almost $3,000 for fertility investments just by asking our CSA members to write a little bit larger check. And it's not for everybody. It's for the people that have the money, and the people that don't have the money, they get the benefit as well. So, briefly, that end product, you have to think about it as not necessarily just something in the field, but this is food that's going to nourish our neighborhood and our community. Just want to talk about one other mineral, and then we'll wrap up and pass the mic. So zinc is a trace mineral that's needed. It helps to grow large leaves, which give you a better solar receptor. And if you're growing grain crops, it's important to have zinc in the very early stages of growth. Application rates, if you're doing soil testing on commercial vegetables, we might, if you have an initial zinc deficiency, we're going to take it with 2 approaches. One is we're going to do a soil application of zinc sulfate, oftentimes around 10 pounds to the acre. And just to be sure about it, we're going to make sure we do a foliar spray, oftentimes a blended micro mix, or if you wanted to do a targeted foliar spray with zinc sulfate. And the foliar application might be, you know, somewhere like 1/3 to 1 to 2 pounds of zinc sulfate. This is pretty common practice, from my understanding, in some of the commercial corn producers. Are there corn producers growing grain corn that are doing zinc sprays? And what it's really about is making sure, especially in the cool soils where you don't really have a root system that's gone out and colonized and been able to necessarily take up everything that soil has to offer, you're going to be planting your corn in early spring soils and they don't have that root system established. a light application of zinc sulfate at the early stages of growth is going to ensure that you have zinc on the scene when you need it to be there. With a lot of these trace minerals, they're cofactors in enzyme development, which means they can be utilized and then utilized and then utilized, and not always being sent to the structural parts of growth, especially in the early stages of growth. So early season application means that we have the benefit throughout the growing season until it maybe is eventually going to end up in the grain. Cost-wise, this is to stress that, materials shouldn't be a limiting factor. A foliar spray of zinc sulfate of a pound and a half of zinc sulfate is going to cost a little over $1 plus the labor cost. The labor cost is going to be higher than the actual material. Some of the considerations around zinc. Phosphate's been known to tie up zinc, especially more so in conventional ag where they're putting on soluble phosphorus fertilizers. But if you have higher background levels of phosphorus, that might be a place where zinc levels, even when they're high in the soil, they don't show up in the tissue analysis. pH will impact the availability, so if you are working soils that are higher in pH, the zinc is going to be less available. It's sort of straightforward for a lot of those cation trace minerals. And so we like to target our soil application to build the zinc levels long term, but a foliar application to make sure we have it right there on the seed from the crop. The idea of spending money on fertilizer and then having it wash away with a 5-inch rainstorm that we get with maybe far too increasingly regular experience. It's not why I want to spend my money. I want to think about what we're going to do to bring a deficient nutrient onto our land, and then what we're going to do to keep it on our land. And so the mineral application, whether it's a foliar application, whether it's broadcast, whether it's blended in, that's really just one starter. If you have deep-rooted forages that can help to accumulate nutrients that are in the subsoil, that's another aspect. You can bring this into that system. But once you bring it in the system, you want to make sure it's there. So one of the things we're doing on our farm a lot is residue digestion sprays at the end of the growing season. We're going to turn our tomatoes in. We're going to come in and do a biological spray on that tomato to make sure we get a big flush of bacteria. Bacteria, one of the things they're good at is storing nitrogen in their bodies. So we're going into the fall, we're going to have a time of the year when nutrients can leach out of that soil. And we want to create a little bit of an explosion of bacteria to make sure they suck as much of that nitrogen that's still available in the soil in September and store it into their bodies. Once those guys go to work for us digesting our crop residue, they're also going to start to take all those other nutrients that were in our tomato stalks for the growing season. And by sequestering it within the biology of our soils, we're going to make it more available for the next year's growing season. So thinking about it from that holistic system, we don't want to get isolated into just thinking about this as a fertility for one season, so on and so forth. Just want to end with this idea, and this is more of a philosophical approach that we focus on the farm, but ultimately I feel like we have a new social contract as food producers, especially in my neck of the woods as a vegetable grower. We're limited in land base in southeastern Massachusetts especially, so when I think about energy-producing crops like grains, we don't really have the acres to produce large amounts of energy-producing crops. Proteins, there's very few dairy. In the state of Massachusetts, 6 million people, I think their average annual production of milk is something like 30 million gallons. It's about 6 gallons per person. So we rely heavily on New York and Vermont for our dairy products. What we do have the capacity is produce nutrition through nutrients, through fresh vegetables and fruits. And to me, it's a little bit of a burden and responsibility to think about what we're producing for our community and to make sure that it's going to nourish them in a way that's not only going to create customers for life with good, tasty vegetables, but is going to help to provide their bodies with the nourishment they need to handle the barrage of chemicals and things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, looking forward to the discussion as we go forward during the course of the day.
Actually, Deb, I think you can do it all right from your, can't you, to switch it back to your station?
Well, I want to thank Derek, and I want to point out that he has brought over some books and references. Those are for looking at only, please don't take them, but a lot of really good stuff over there to look at. I got several ideas for things I want to try from Derek, and one of the things that I've harped on at these meetings that I want to harp on again today is the capacity of us to do our own research on this stuff, on this and whatever else we want to do to improve our farms. But if I really would want to suggest that if you try a new practice based on what Derek mentioned, based on something that Jack will talk about, and that Klaus will talk about, if you can, leave some check strips or check areas. And that's going to make a huge difference, especially for something like for us vegetable growers, and I'm an apple grower, and I can think about maybe trying some zinc and some boron and some sulfur, maybe light applications, and see if I can see any, actually taste any difference between treated and untreated plants or trees. And that's the kind of thing that if we just go whole hog with something and treat the whole farm that way, you got nothing to compare with. So if it's a good year, maybe stuff would have done well if you hadn't done anything different. But you never know. But if you can put a check in there, I think it really will help us advance forward on this. And one of the things I hope we can get into in our discussion after lunch is the idea of using a refractometer to measure bricks as an indicator to tell us whether a practice that we've done has had a beneficial or negative effect on the crop. This is something, again, I don't want to take too much time on this. Is Jack ready now? Okay.
Are you ready, Jack?
Yeah, I'm ready. As long as are we muted or not?
Okay.
No,
I'll be done in just a second.
Okay.
Just that something even like our sulfur sprays for disease control, is that actually maybe a little bit negative on the trees, and we might be able to tell that from Grix measurements. So with that, let's switch over to Jack. And Jack, thank you so much. Jack is participating a little under the weather, but he's at his computer. He's going to share his knowledge, which is very considerable. So thanks, Jack.
Okay. Thank you. This is wild here, and I feel fine, but I just really did not want to drive 8 hours either way. So I'm sitting here at UVM in Heather's office, and this is the first time I've ever done anything like this, but we're going to give it a shot. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. Good. So let's see if we're just trying to advance this thing here. There we go. Okay. So I'm coming at this not from the vegetable point of view. I'm coming at it more from the dairy farmer / grain farmer point of view, but probably my experience is similar to Derek's. And I guess the main point that I'm trying to get across is that, we're probably most of us are organic farmers, and organic farming is a set of standards and a bunch of rules and regs that sort of a method of production. It tells us how and what we can do, but it sort of ends there, and there really is no judgment for quality at all. It's just basically a set of standards for production. So I personally want organic food to taste the best it possibly can and be as good for our health, our soils, our environment as it possibly can. So I've you can sort of judge food by lots of different ways, but certainly taste, keeping qualities, how vigorously something grows, whether you're infested with weeds or not, whether your cows like the hay you grow. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I view my farm as a whole farm organism. I'm a dairy farmer first and foremost, so I pretty much concentrate on forage crops. I rotate my forage crops with grains. I live in northern Vermont, right on the Canadian border, in a rather cool region, probably similar to St. Lawrence County over there in New York State. But where we live, we can grow just about everything we need to grow. We can grow corn, soybeans, barley, oats, wheat, peas, you name it. So we grow short season crops, but we grow really good ones. So I guess how do we get there? And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. So see if I can make this thing go. So it's so I guess when it comes to taking care of the soil, I look at it as sort of like a big triangle. You've got your chemical department, your physical department, and your biological department. They're all three of these things are intertwined, and they're all reliant upon each other. And you can't have one without the other. But it's very interesting. It seems like, as Derek was saying, if you can kickstart your farming program with some minerals, it's something you can do. It's something you can, I've heard different people say that it's not very sustainable because, you have to bring in your sulpomag from New Mexico, or your boron from Death Valley, or what have you. But I think minerals are great, and they've really helped me. And I think a lot of times you can, Derek was talking about sort of the human health issue, and I'll just take it from the dairy cow issue. And most of us need to feed grain on our dairy farms in order to have enough energy, for our cows in the forages. And there's certainly been as grain prices go through the roof because of lots of different factors. Certainly the ethanol is one thing that's contributed to it, and we're sort of at low reserves these days. If we can grow forages that are really high in energy, we don't have to feed grain on our dairy farms. So I grow a fair amount of grain on my farm, 200 acres. I have 200 acres of forages and 200 acres of grain crops, and it's gotten to the point now where a very small amount of my grain is actually fed to my cows, and most of it goes for people food, for whole wheat flour, cornmeal, even soybeans for tofu and that kind of stuff. So that's sort of money saved. And I can still have grain as part of my rotation to have straw to bed my cows, but I can grow forages that are hopefully very high in energy. And the way you get forages that are high in energy is by doing everything possible to promote the most efficient and complete photosynthesis that you can possibly have. And so I've been fortunate enough over the years to I've been doing this since I guess we bought our farm in 1976, and I started growing crops in 1977. We process our own milk into yogurt, Butterworks Farm yogurt. On our farm, we've been doing that. We started in 1979 and sort of became official in 1984. So we've been a licensed milk handler since then, and we've been lucky enough to have some income since the early 80s to be able to sort of prime the pump or kickstart our our fertility program, and it just seems like it gets better and better. So back in the 80s, I had I used to call him my guru. I don't know what you'd call, maybe my soil advisor, and this fellow's name was Fred Franklin. He's passed away now, but his advisor was a fellow from Cobleskill, New York, named Dr. Norman Curtis, and Dr. Curtis was a protege of Albrecht. So I've been sort of on the Albrecht program with since then, but in the beginning, I never really had enough money to be able to really put on, the minerals that I really needed. So when I first started, it seemed like I did a lot of soil tests, and it seems like we were always short of potassium. I don't know where it went, or but we have low potassium in our soils. So one of the first amendments that I started using back in the late 70s, early 80s was K-Mag or Sulpamag, sulfate of potash magnesia from Carlsbad, New Mexico, and the results were just tremendous. Legumes just grew like crazy, and it seemed like it made they made more milk, and the milk tasted better. The feed was more palatable. As time went on, I started adding copper sulfate, zinc sulfate, manganese sulfate, and boron to the mixture. Not in super large amounts, but in what I could afford. And I think as time went on, things got better and better. So when we sort of talk about there's different soil advisors running around the countryside, telling you what to do, and you go to these acres conferences, and there seems like there's 5 or 6 different camps of, there's the Phil Wheeler camp, and then there's the Dan Scow camp, and then there's the Gary Zimmer camp, and basically it seems like they're all pretty much after the same thing. Maybe there's 2 different sort of paths that people go down. There's the Albrecht balance with the the base saturation and the 70% calcium and the 10 to 12% magnesium and the 5% potassium sort of base saturation, and then there's the Kerry Reams camp with a biological theory of ionization, and they like to use lots of limestone, probably tons and tons of it. But you sort of pick out who your guru is, or who you want to follow, and I've sort of had some pretty good experiences. I remember back about 15 years ago, Gary Zimmer came to Vermont for the first time, and I was using some kiln dust on my fields at the time. Recommended me by a Canadian agronomist, and he started talking about his BioCal, and we figured out that it was basically the same thing, and found out sort of the importance of calcium, and how calcium is, as Gary Zimmer would say, is the sort of the trucker of all minerals, and boron is the steering wheel. I'm sure you've heard that expression before. So you've got to have that sort of basic foundation of meeting your macro minerals. I mean, you need to the place to start out with is a good soil test, and I happen to be have sort of converted or start to use. I've been using the Logan Labs soil tests myself for probably the last 10 or 15 years, and so I think if you can take, first thing, there's plenty of things you can do, but you've got to make sure that your macro elements are in balance and an adequate supply. And if they're not, I guess that's you're certainly not going to get the results you want by getting the salt and pepper shaker out and sticking a little zinc, copper, molybdenum, or selenium on if you don't have enough calcium, magnesium, potassium, or phosphorus in the proper balances. So that's one place to start. And I'm sure I've heard Klaus talk about this too before. If your pHs are a little on the low side, rock phosphate is probably your ideal fertilizer, because the little bit of acidity or extra hydrogen in your soil is going to break down some of the phosphorus in that rock phosphate and turn that tricalcium phosphate into dicalcium phosphate. So that's sort of a good place to start. You may need lime. You also, if I'm probably preaching to the choir here, and I'm sure most of you know this, but so say if your calciums are way too high and your magnesiums are a little on the low side, that's sort of a good indicator that you're going to need some magnesium in your major fertilizer that you're going to put on. So you can Sulpamag. For me anyway, I'm usually short of potassium, so with Sulpamag analyzing at 002211, you've got that's a pretty good fertilizer. So for my basic approach is I usually spread Sulpamag once a year, in the spring, and I don't use a pile of it. I used to use more, but as the price has gone up, I just cut back to the point where my total sort of spring amount of fertilizer that I put on my forage crops and my grain crops is about somewhere around 300 pounds to the acre. So it might be about 200 to 225 pounds of Sulpamag. Mixed in with that would be copper, zinc, manganese sulfate, and some boron. And then I've used a fair amount of gypsum, and I've ended up driving my calcium levels up a little too high. So, I'm trying to sort of get my magnesium levels back to where they were. So this past year, I had my fertilizer company add 100 pounds of Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, to the blend for every ton. And so what we did this past season is we teamed up with John Kemp from Ohio, from Advancing Eco Agriculture. And he's I'm sure that he's been to, I think he's probably has consultants probably in your part of the country, because you're a lot closer to northeastern Ohio than I am. And he has, he's got a business called Advancing Eco Agriculture, and he's a young Amish fellow in his mid-20s who has done a lot of reading and grew up on a vegetable farm and sort of watched diseases consume his crops, and has sort of come with some some pretty good products. So we were fortunate enough this past season that in Vermont here there's an outfit called the what are they? Is it? It's not the Latner Foundation, is it? It is the Latner Foundation that is interested in the Weston A. Price approach to not feeding your cows to grass-fed milk and dairy. So Heather Darby here at UVM and myself, we got a grant from the Latner Foundation to actually study the effectiveness of sort of nutrient-dense mineral applications, on the land. So we went and did a bunch of soil tests with Logan Labs, and what I ended up doing was I ended up doubling the amount of copper, zinc, manganese, and boron that I added to my Sulpamag. And so basically my cost of fertilizing, just my sort of dry fertilizer blend per acre ended up to about $87, $88 per acre, which seems like a lot of money. But when you can grow feed like the stuff we're looking at here in the pictures, and not have to feed any grain, and have your cows producing milk with 18, 20 bricks, and and by eating 3 or 4 pounds of grain a day as opposed to 10 or 15, I think you're actually saving yourself money in the long run, and you're producing a better tasting product. So that's what we did this past season. And so at the same time, what we did is Heather, we did that, and we tried a bunch of John's products, and which I'm sure Derek, might use some of the same stuff too. But there certainly he has some soil sprays, that you put on before the crop starts growing, called Rejuvenate, which is a sort of a biological stimulant of sorts. And then he's the main fertilizer, the main sort of foliar feed that we did was something called Photomag, which has got quite a bit of magnesium and seawater and all kinds of stuff in it. And I think it ended up, I can't remember exactly what the price was per acre, but by the time we got done, and per application, it was probably in the $15 to $20 per acre. And I had never done any spraying in my life on my farm. Never, I think maybe when I first started out, we had some corn, just an acre of corn for experiment, and I had a little backpack sprayer and did some, but after farming for just about 30 years, I finally bought a crop sprayer, and we started, we actually applied these foliar feeds to the hay crops. At the same time we were doing this, Heather laid out some crops, some plots of forages, the replicated test plots, which I think I'll get to here. I don't know why I just put all these beautiful pictures of forages, because must be spring is coming. So there we are. There's Heather and her troops, in the early spring this past year, laying out her replicated plots for for how they were going to spray. So these were sprayed with a backpack sprayer with all kinds of different combinations of John Kempf's foliar sprays. There was, I think he had one called PHT phosphorus, and another one called, which is plant health therapy, and another one called PHT potassium, and then there was the Photomag. And then Heather basically, did the, we kind of mowed between them. This is, we're getting into sort of mid to late May here, and you can see our farm. We're high up on a plateau with sort of fairly well drained glacial soils. No limestone underneath our farm at all. It's, probably tends to be acid, but, there's 25, 30 years of me applying organic amendments and compost and that kind of thing to my farm. So we don't really have to do any plowing here at our farm. I mean, this field we're looking at here has not been turned over and reseeded for about 15 years. And, I find that on my farm that we've got tons and tons of legumes, and that are balance between legumes and grasses is probably almost 60% legumes and 40% grasses. And it seems like by using these fertility programs and concentrating on the minerals, it just really, it drives the legumes crazy, and we can make, excellent feed. So the long and the short of it is that, there's Heather out there. You can see the big hay field has been mowed, and Heather's here mowing the plots with this little BCS mower, and we picked up the samples, and I think there's a picture of Susan here. Let's see here. I'll go back up here. Sorry about that. These plots were basically picked up and dried and taken to the lab here at UVM for analysis, because what we're really interested in is more than just a regular NIR sort of feed analysis. We're sort of interested in, what are the omega 3s and the omega fats that are actually in these plants, and can we really get the level of lipids and fats in these plants up to that 5 or 6% level that will give us the right not to feed grain. And it's very interesting. I'm sure those of you who have dairy cows have noticed that every once in a while you make some hay and you put that hay in front of your cows, and they just inhale the stuff. And then you go to feed your grain, and they don't want to eat grain. And that's sort of the sign of, having excellent feed. And it's more than just having that 21% protein. It's about actually getting that 70 energy. So that's kind of what we were after in this experiment. So the most interesting thing about this experiment is that the lipid analysis in these plants were still, all the extractions have been made here at UVM, but we still haven't got the results back because the lab is extremely busy, and it's very time consuming and labor intensive to sort of do this. But what we did notice in just the regular forage samples is that the biggest difference as far as quality improvement in hay was, by using the photomag, on the first cutting of hay. So that was Heather's sort of conclusion. My conclusion from doing it on a much larger scale, like on that big hay field out back, I think we did it on close to 80 or 90 acres of hay, is that we had some of the best forages that we've ever grown this past summer. I mean, that's kind of definitely a very subjective way of looking at it, but I was very pleased with. Normally, you've got a big stack of wrapped round bales, and there's some you start feeding them in the beginning of the season, and you figure out your cows pretty much tell you which bales you want to eat and which bales you don't, and which the bales they don't want to eat. But this year they want to eat all of them. So and I'm sure we had a dry, hot summer with probably more rainfall than you had in New York State. So that's one of the advantages to living in the mountains where it's cloudy a lot. But it's I can't say enough good about and it seems like to me, this whole approach of putting on small amounts of the micro minerals is sort of like the icing on the cake. If you haven't got the good ingredients to make the bottom of the cake, you're not going to have anything to put it on. So you really got to start with with your macro elements, and then go from there to your micros, and then at the last thing you're going to do is you're going to put on the copper, zinc. The selenium, the cobalt. All these things that are sort of enzyme cofactors that are going to make the difference. The real quality difference. So that's been my my experience with this, and it's been a good one. I think there's there's a lot of other things you can do besides sprinkling minerals on and putting on foliar feeds. You certainly have to pay attention to your sort of your organic matter. I guess the other thing that we've tried to do, and I mean this is more a this isn't just how we make our hay, and we've sort of gotten into the sort of the wide swath mowing bit and the hay in a day, and I think it was actually one of your people from Cornell and UW-Madison or something sort of come up with the idea that if once you cut hay, the first 6 hours that it's laying on the ground, it's can get rid of probably up more than half of its moisture, because the leaf stomata, the little openings in the leaves, remain open for the first 6 hours, and actually the the grasses are still photosynthesizing, or they don't really begin to respire and break down for that first 6 hours. They're still building sugars. So if you can get your hay cut fairly early in the day, get it tedded out, you might actually and get it down to below 60% moisture before the end of the afternoon, and you can sort of do the old hay in a day thing and make some extremely good quality feed, and not have it go through the night with a dew on it the next morning. So I mean, that's sort of the ideal. And when you mow early and when it's short, it's gonna dry better for sure. But we've thank God for the round bales and the wrap, and it's sort of been one of the things that has allowed small dairy farms to make really high quality feed. So that's how we're pretty much we're pretty much marshmallow makers at our farm. So there's a picture of just another heather going at it. This might actually be second cut right here, but I'm not sure. And so she's had her troops, and every plot was, as you can see, was gathered up, and then Susan, one of her technicians, did the weighing, and then they actually took it back and dried it in their little crop dryer. And I'm not sure if it was in Alberg or St. Albans, but that's how Heather did it. So that's kind of the long and the short of my adventures with with sort of building nutrient dense forages. I have to say that I haven't really done too much. Last year was my first year spraying these formulas on my land, and we did not use it on as many grain crops as as I would have liked to, and that's this year we did use some of John Kemp's Rejuvenate on some spring wheat that we planted last year. And where I live, I mean, we actually got wheat in the ground the 23rd of March this past season, and it took it probably 10 days to come up, so we sprayed some Rejuvenate on there before the wheat came up, and then we ran over it with a tine weeder, and it seemed to have a really good effect on that. And the wheat just blew out of the ground, and there were very little weeds in our wheat. So this is and then another nice thing about these sprays is that they're totally non-toxic. I remember when we were out spraying, this is a second cut on a hayfield that becomes a pasture for second cut, and I remember my wife was like, you can't spray that stuff right next to the cows, but we did, and nobody died. So I guess it's okay, And this is actually that we're putting some on that wheat land I was talking about, and so nothing fancy, just a Zimmerman sprayer from Pennsylvania, and we had a little bit of learning to do with what nozzles to use, and luckily I've got a friend of mine who is really good at this, and we were able to hire him to help us do our spraying. Our little program that we did, that Heather did too, was done on 2 different farms. It was done at our farm, and it was also done at Shelburne Farms, which is in Lake Champlain. So we're more up in the mountains in Lake Champlain, and Shelburne Farms is on Lake Champlain down in the lowlands. But what I find very interesting is that Shelburne Farms really, there was no, they really didn't seem like they got any benefit out of the spraying at all. But the thing that they didn't do was they didn't put any of the, they didn't put the dry blend of fertilizer on either. They just thought they were going to put the sprays on and go to heaven, and it really didn't really work. So, but I have to say this wheat was just phenomenal wheat. There it is right there. I've never grown a crop of spring wheat like this and had it ready in the middle of July. So it was, of course, it was an exceptional season too. Here we are, just loading up the spray truck. And I have to say that I really like farming with cows, and I would not know what to do if I didn't have them. It seems like they really they go with the land, they go with the cool, somewhat damp climate that we have, and they complement the land, and they're one of the greatest things about dairy farming is that the organic matter, the carbon and the nitrogen stay home on the farm in the form of manure and urine, and maybe you're shipping small amounts of minerals off, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus in the milk, and cows have that ability to digest and make incredible human protein for humans out of grasses that we can't go out there and eat the pastures, and and it makes for a really nice rotation too, and having cows sort of fits in well with grain crops too. Our farm, we've, as I said earlier, a lot of these fields have not been seeded and plowed like this particular one here. It's probably about 15 years. There's some fields that haven't. The last time they got plowed was 1983. We're high up on a hill. It is glacial. It's kind of rocky, so I really don't want to plow it if I can help it. And since we've got about 120 acres of forage land around the barns, on the home farm, it either all gets grazed or hayed at least. It all gets hayed at least once a season. Well, not all of it. There's 25 acres of permanent pasture, and then some of the hayfields get cut once and grazed 3 times. Some of the hayfields get cut twice and grazed 2 times. But it's very nice having all that grass, right within walking distance of the barn. You can see there's a lot of. We have a lot of white clover and bluegrass, on our farm. The other thing I find very interesting too is that we've got incredible species diversity too. We don't just have one type of grass. I mean, we've got brome and timothy and bluegrass and orchard grass, and and there's some old alfalfa in here from when it was seeded alfalfa many years ago. Some red clover, lots of white clover. But having that that sort of diversity of forage species, I think keeps it interesting. I know that we had a big open house last August, and actually John Kempf came to our farm, and we had 125 people there, and there was this couple from southern Vermont that were sort of on the program too, and they kind of snuck into our milk room and took a little sample of milk out of our tank, and then kind of went around the corner with their refractometer, and they got a Brix of 18, and the guy said to me, "How did you do that?" He said, my milk is only 10, and I said, well, I think it's the minerals, but it's I know that that our milk really tastes sweet and it's high in protein. So, and of course, we've got colored cows, and I guess this is probably what I'll conclude with is that we have a way to sort of cycle the straw and the organic matter on our farm, and that is is our bedding pack. So we have this big hoop barn here that we put up in 2001, and our cows spend the winter, in this. We call it our solar barn, and the walls are 10 feet tall, and they're built out of 8x8 hemlock posts. I mean, it's not a fancy barn, but we put straw out here twice a day in the morning. We do a major spread of straw in the morning, and our whole dairy herd, we milk about 45 to 50 jerseys. We've got probably another, I'm going to say, maybe 40 young stock, and they can go in and out. The barn is 60 feet wide by 120 feet long. The manure pack in there gets up to about 5 or 6 feet thick by spring, and then we move it out, and then we windrow it in a field just down the road. I've tried various ways of cleaning this barn out. We've got a grapple fork for our tractor, and but it takes probably a week to 8 to 10 days, spreader load by spreader load to, build a windrow. So what I've started doing in the last couple of years, and since this field is about half a mile from the farm, on some rented land actually, I hire my neighbor to come in with the excavator, and it takes him a day and a half, and he just makes a long windrow like this, and then we actually take that windrow and we actually shovel it into the spreader the first time, and the spreader just keeps creeping forward, and the fluffed up manure comes out the back. One thing that I've done in the last 2 years is I've started adding a little bit of hardwood bark to our bedding pack. So once a week we spread hardwood bark on the pack, and it's made all the difference in making really, really nice compost. I think that the bark kind of gives it some loft, and it the wood products in there sort of feed the fungi, and the straw and the hay in there feed the bacteria, so you get that sort of balance between fungal and bacterial decomposition, and whereas before, when we were making compost with just straw on the pack, it almost seemed like it didn't break down as well. It was kind of almost goopy stuff. This stuff is much more friable it's very also interesting as the years have gone on. We have this old Sittler compost turner that we, got out of the bushes at the Intervale here in Burlington, for pretty reasonable cost, and we do some turning with this old compost turner. But as time has gone on, we used to turn it like every week, and now if we turn it 2 or 3 times, during the summer, the schedule of this is usually we get our first cutting of hay done, and then we clean our barn out. And then there's some of the finished compost right there. For me, I really like spreading compost in the fall, because it seems like for us it's finished then. It's also the time of the year, September, when everything is as dry as it's going to be for the year, so you're not out there, in the spring on damp ground, pressing things down. It's also, I like to spread compost on grasses that are 4 to 6 inches tall, so that there's some sort of protection for what you're spreading. It seems like the plants actually end up kind of wicking some of that, the goodness of the compost right down into the soil. And it's also the time of the year when the earth is kind of starting to breathe in again. It's the end of the season. The leaves will be falling off the trees pretty quickly. The plants aren't sucking up water like they used to. So, it's a time of the year, where it's before, your cereals are harvested. Maybe your third cutting of hay is done. If you're growing soybeans and corn or sunflowers or something, it's not quite October yet, so you're not thinking about getting the combine out, so you've got time to do it. So it all kind of works out and kind of blends into the balance of the year's work. So for me, it's sort of that, the balance between the chemical, the physical, and the biological is really important. I mean, this is just some pictures of us working in the spring. I'm not afraid to use limestone, and this is some new riverland that we got here, and this is sort of just a picture of kind of what our forages look like. You can see there's a lot of perennial rye in here. It's got that kind of the shiny reflective nature to it, and that there's real energy right here, and it's either going to be fed to your cows as graze or as hay, and it's going to sort of bring you well-being, I think. So and it's it's all sort of part of the big picture. I think there's certainly no kind of cookbook recipe for how to do it. Everybody's farm is different. Everybody's soils are different. But I do think that, especially in the beginning, you sort of got to be able to be willing to kind of give back more than you take. And it's kind of like this, kind of hidden bank account or something that just pays you back tenfold over time but maybe in the very beginning it doesn't. It seems like it's an empty hole into which you have to dump money. But you know, and some people have more resources than others. That's for sure. And you know, nobody's going to tell anybody, you know, just what to do. But you know, I think if you feed the soil, you know, it's going to feed the plants, and it's going to feed you, and it's going to make everything better. So that's pretty much all I've got to say. I'm really sorry that I couldn't drive. I was really looking forward to going out there, but I got some sort of cold that just did not seem to want to go away. I think I'm pretty well through it now, but I think a drive out to New York would have, you know, been stressful for me. So I'm very thankful that I could do it use this venue, and I know probably some of you in the audience there, and I would have liked to have seen you, and I'm sure I will in the future. So I don't know if if you want me to answer any questions right now, but that's pretty much what I've got to say. So thank you.
Oh, there we go. All right.
I want to see if we can turn on the camera here. You can go ahead and see what you're trying to say.
Okay. Jack, can you hear us all right?
I can hear you just fine. Yep.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I think we have time for just a few questions. And I want to start out myself because this is all a stretch for me. I'm one of those guys who thinks that put the compost on, recycle the nutrients, and the trace minerals will come with the compost and everything. And so, is there any chance that by cycling all the nutrients through your cows and through your manure and through your compost, that at some point you might have to put on less of some of these purchased products, or is that not in the cards?
I sure would hope so, but certainly, when you're talking about the sulfur, and it does seem like there are some elements that are very, very difficult to, build up adequate levels. But certainly, if you can build up your CEC and, build up your bank account, God, that's I do think though that dairy farming and vegetable farming, they're both pretty intensive, forms of agriculture that, if done properly, can be very profitable. And you are shipping minerals off your farm, and especially here in the Northeast, where we get so much rain, and at least where I live, I don't have limestone underneath me, so I don't know where that calcium is going to come from, and so I haven't really. That would be the ideal, but I haven't got there, and I don't know if I ever will.
All right. So do people have questions? I'll relay them here. Yeah, Kurt.
I'm wondering about this timing of this hay harvest and forage harvests, because I would think that ready cuts and how quickly cuts can impact how well the species of forages survive.
Oh. Well, so the question is on the forage harvesting schedule and whether that changes the species mix in the forage. Is that fair, Kurt? Is that? Yeah.
I'm not sure that the forage harvesting schedule would change the species, but what will change the species on the forages on your land is whether you graze them or not. And I think seems like people who end up grazing hay fields end up with more white clover and wild low growing white clover and bluegrass than a field that is maybe mowed 3 times. There's something about having cows out there munching, that does change things, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it does seem that I would think my experience has been that if you've got the minerals, the legumes will grow. I guess drainage is important too.
All right, more questions. We have time for like 2 more questions, and then we'll switch to class.
You asked Jack about how close he grazes. That's part of the
Why don't you ask him?
No.
I can hear you, Klaus. Go ahead.
Hi, Jack. Yeah, I think we need to follow that up with how close you graze. You know, how much regrowth, how much do you leave when you pull the cow off, and how much regrowth do you like before you turn the cows on it?
Oh, that's a great question. Usually we don't graze close. You know, 2 to 3 inches left, and like to graze. You know, put them in there when the grass is like 6 to 8 inches tall. So it's, you know, it's just, there's a lot of material there. I think it's much, you know, that way you're not depleting your root reserves.
All right, so one last question. There's got to be one more. Yeah.
My understanding is the Brix level on crop is higher after using. Isn't it important to update when the Brix level is not really higher?
Oh, here's a good one. The Brix level of the forage changes at the time of day, and our questioner says it's highest in the afternoon. So wouldn't it be better to harvest to mow your forages then?
Yeah, that's a good question. That certainly has been the conventional logic up until rather recently, and I think if it really is true that the first 6 hours after mowing that you continue to build sugars, it would seem to me that you get the best of both worlds by mowing earlier, and having your forages continue to build sugars for the first 6 hours, and then you get it off the field that same day. But it doesn't always happen, because, you know, if a real heavy crop isn't going to, you still might have to wait till the following day. So there's the real, and there's the ideal, and that's it.
All right.
And
Great. Well, Jack, I don't know if you want to stay tuned in. I hope we can continue to record this for the morning session. I think we're doing that here, and Deb, I don't know if you are there. But our final speaker is Klaus Martens, and again, this is a stretch for me, so I'm really curious to hear what Klaus has to say on all this too. Thanks so much, Jack.
Actually, I got one more for you, Jack.
Go ahead, Klaus.
I heard in Vermont was saying that you could buy the neighbor's farm one bale at a time.
You would say what? Say that again. Say that again.
Buying the neighbor's farm one bale at a time, and the effect of continually selling hay off a farm. I'd just like have you comment on that, because it really is something you can observe on land that's had forages removed from it and exported from the farm over a long period of time.
That is very, very true. And boy, there's a lot of people that do that, you know, and it seems like that's why you're better off to not sell any feed, you know, and for me, I like to sell animals instead, you know, which I think if you're in a dairy situation and you've got plenty of heifers coming along and your cull rate is really low because your cows are healthy, you know, that's, to me, you know, it's easier to, you know, send 10 heifers off your farm a year than it is to load up several tractor trailers full of hay. So yeah, I think keep as much of your carbon home as you possibly can.
Hey, thanks. I thought that was a good follow-up, because you've taken probably a farm that's had the nutrients exported for years before you got it, and I think that might explain one reason you've had to bring so much in, because you're not just starting out from new land. You're undoing, you know, years worth of farming that might have been extractive.
You know, I don't know if we can go for another couple of minutes here, but one thing I'll say is I don't think this would just, you know, actually when we bought our farm, it had been a dairy farm up until the very year before, and minerally, you know, it was pretty well stocked up. But, you know, I see a lot of people, you know, I see a lot of young farmers, or, you know, people who are just starting out, especially, you know, there's a lot of people, like I have a woman working for us right now making yogurt who just bought a farm, and, you know, I sort of get this kind of vicariously ride along with them, you know, and on their early farming journeys, and there's just no places left that aren't beat, You know, I mean, it's like, you know, the only farms, either farms have been gobbled up by the, by the big farm next door, or they've been, had lots of fertility exported off of them. A lot of hay's been sold and nothing's been put back on them. But, it's like, what do you do in a situation like this when, when the land has been, sort of exploited? And sadly, it's part of our culture. We don't think, we think that there's a free lunch out there, and that, that the stuff is just there for the taking. And, so as a beginning farmer, a lot of times you're dealing with somebody, some thievery that sort of happened before you got there. And, and I think that should definitely be taken into consideration when, when someone, gets a loan, or works with the land trust, or however they can to get their farm, is, how do you restock the fertility of somebody else before you exploit it? So, and maybe that subject will actually, come to the surface and be more important. But thanks for bringing that up, Klaus.
Yeah, thank you. That's
See you in a couple of days here in Vermont, I guess. So.
Yeah, day after tomorrow.
Okay. Take care. Thanks a lot.
I think I'd like to take this from looking at it from the other side, and that's how did we get where we are? Where did the ideas that we call organic farming come from? And not just the people, but also some of the events. And a lot of people from the conventional side say that organic farmers want to bring the clock back to farming their grandfathers did, or what was done in the 30s. And I don't think that's true at all. In the 1930s, we had a type of agriculture in the United States that was not sustainable. There were serious problems. And the chemicals came along at a time when we had the Dust Bowl, we had the wars, land was degraded, and agriculture was facing problems of sustainability. Now, there were cultures around the world that had faced that and survived. If you look at, there's a book called Farmers for 40 Centuries, where in some of the rice-producing cultures of the East, they were farming land sustainably and maintaining very high yields for literally 4,000 years. There were other cultures
What caused mine to stop?
Welcome to GoToMeeting. Online meetings made easy.
I don't need to.
There are 1 other callers on the call.